Welcome to Girls in Finance, the podcast where we share insights from experienced professionals to empower the next generation of women in the financial industry and promote financial literacy. Today, we have a very special guest, Christina. To start us off, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, so some background about me is that I studied architecture and became an architect. And then I realized, oh, maybe there's something more. And I decided to go to business school. And now I am transitioning into a career in infrastructure.
I see. What inspired you to pursue an MBA and transition into the business field, particularly considering your experiences before?
So some background is that I had always planned to go to business school at some point. So I began high school with a strong interest in math and science. And then toward the end of high school, I was really into art and I wanted to become a painter or a photographer. I was the yearbook editor and I thought, oh, maybe I could do a career in magazine editing. But ultimately, I ended up choosing to study architecture because I had taken an architectural drafting class and I really enjoyed it. And architecture seemed to lie at the intersection of art and science. So that was my perspective at the time. And I also thought that, oh, architect is like some prestigious profession that would pay well. Um, and then during my undergrad in architecture school, I thought about pursuing an MBA to learn the business skills that I would need to run my own practice. But as I got deeper and deeper into the architecture profession, it seemed like business didn't have much to do with architecture. There's some sort of disconnect between what it meant to be an architect versus making money to the extent that, like, if you wanted to join a developer in a development company, it was considered that you would be going to the dark side, like the dark side meaning that you'd make good money actually. And I didn't know this prior to pursuing a career in architecture. I thought that, that you wouldn't be a starving artist, basically. Um, but then fast forward to my first transition, I was working at one of the top architecture firms in Canada. And after I finished my undergrad and my master's thesis and got 3 years of apprenticeship hours and completed my professional exams, I felt like I had reached a sort of glass ceiling. Um, as to like how high I could be promoted in a traditional architecture firm. So again, the idea of the MBA entered my mind, but instead I was approached by a recruiter to join a real estate management firm as their in-house architect, where I would stamp drawings for their renovations of residential suites. So I thought, okay, maybe it's not necessary to get an MBA and that I could eventually just transition internally to their asset management side. But then a few years went by and the design development grew and grew until the pandemic, which changed everything. The plan that the company had was to phase out the design department. And because I was seen as just a designer, there was no way for me to make that pivot into a different department. And that's when I decided, okay, it's probably the right time to pursue an MBA, at least just to prove that I'm more than a designer. Then I became kind of a full-blown entrepreneur when I opened my own music rehearsal space during the MBA. And now, like post-MBA, I'm transitioning into a career in infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you so much for discussing how your MBA and like architecture like so far has helped you with your whole journey. I guess like given your diverse entrepreneurial experiences, how have you like managed your personal finances?
I would say that number one is being frugal. I recently read a book that I would highly recommend called The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness by Morgan Housel. And there's a quote in there about how financial success is a combination of being frugal and maintaining a certain level of anxiety about money. And I think that describes my approach to personal finance. Because the anxiety kind of helps me to not just buy things unless I really need it. Because money is a limited resource. So when you want to be strategic about where you spend it, especially when you're opening a business that has a lot of upfront costs. I think that being frugal and saving money for the sake of saving allowed me to like generate a large nest egg that when I was approached with the opportunity to open a rehearsal space, I was able to reach into my reserves to support that endeavor. Because a lot of times people think of saving as, oh, as long as I put away 10% of my income, I'm fine. And then they go and blow the rest of their money. But it's like you never know what's in store in the future. So I highly advise saving as much as possible. And I don't know if oh yeah, that's it.
I see. Do you have any specific tips for maybe like young entrepreneurs, especially like around our age, who a lot of us lately have been trying to pursue the entrepreneurial path? I was wondering if you have any advice financially, maybe since most of us don't really know going into it.
So if you are opening a brick and mortar business, I would say that a tip is that paint solves a lot of problems. So don't just like buy everything new or whatever. There's an old Canadian TV show called The Painted House with Debbie Travis that I watched growing up, and I learned to transform any old piece of junk into something new and useful with just a simple coat of paint. And that's what I've done with the rehearsal space to ensure that we don't spend more money than we need to. Most of the furniture in the lounge area was either bought secondhand, or given to us for free or constructed by us with inexpensive materials from Home Depot. So to unify everything, I would just paint everything black with some accent pieces in red. And this not only gives the space a striking look, but it didn't cost much. So also, I would say using creativity and ingenuity, you can solve, sorry, using creativity and ingenuity, you can salvage a lot of materials. For example, the rehearsal rooms were constructed using a lot of 1 inch thick scrap pieces of 2x4. Like most people would have seen the scrap wood as like a pile of junk, but I ended up using the scraps to make acoustic diffusers that hang in our hourly rehearsal room. And these diffusers, they increase the audible clarity of the room. So, for like no money at all, I ended up, making these diffusers that are really useful. And then going back to the point of saving money, a financial tip that I have for young entrepreneurs is to always factor in a contingency fund. Because like you might have the best laid plans in a spreadsheet, but there will always be unknown unknowns that cost way more than you anticipate. And a huge general tip that I have for aspiring entrepreneurs is that you need grit and to know when to quit. Because like obviously don't give up after the first hurdle, but also don't stick it out for like the millionth hurdle. If you have that many hurdles, there's probably something wrong, and there's no shame in just like quitting and like regrouping. And that leads me to another point is like, don't be afraid to fail. Because I know like failure in school means like you can't proceed to the next grade, but failure in a venture is like a huge learning experience. And you can apply all those lessons to the next venture, which helps you, eventually succeed. And I heard on a podcast somewhere that the first 5 people in your venture have to be self-starters. So at the beginning, you don't have time to be thinking of, oh, what tasks can I delegate? You need people around you who can just see what needs to be done and then they just do it. And that like helps you succeed for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of your advice about entrepreneurship. And I guess like moving on from this like topic, considering that you've also worked in a professional setting as well as dwelled your hands into entrepreneurship, have you ever like experienced like workplace politics?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, I think the school system kind of gives you the impression that everything's a meritocracy. But then, and also the school system, tries to be more advanced. But then when you enter the workforce, there are people who are like 40 or 50 years older than you who want to run things the old-fashioned way or whatever. And they usually are the ones with the power. Um, so I would say it's a big adjustment, especially if you're entering a field that's very traditional, like architecture and male-dominated, like architecture, that a lot of the things that you learn in school don't immediately apply. Um, and there's still sort of forces at work that like kind of backdoor conversations of who's getting promoted and whatnot. So I think that it's good to be aware that that could happen, but also not be discouraged by it. Um, just know that you need to put things in place that would be advantageous to your own success, and don't be kind of beaten down by the system.
Thank you for sharing. I feel like as women, we don't really know too much about it before entering the workforce. And I think it's mainly something that we have to experience firsthand to truly get an understanding of. And both Tomby and I still have to see for ourselves. But to shift a little for the conversation, we were wondering if you could elaborate on, like, for women entering like long-term relationships as yourself, what financial like management strategies would you recommend?
I would say that everyone's situation is different. But I want to preface this by saying that I have been divorced before. So I did enter into my marriage thinking that it would last forever. So I just added my then husband's name to my existing bank account so that it became a joint account. But what I didn't know at the time was that you can never unjoin a bank account. So when we were getting divorced, I had to like open a new bank account and untangle the financial mess, I guess. Um, but I know that a lot of my peers who enter into long-term relationships, they would keep all of their finances separate and have a joint account for sharing expenses. Like, if you had to split rent or buy groceries or something, that would come out of that joint account. And I would take that approach in the future. However, I would caveat that by saying that I'm sure it would be difficult to keep everything separate over a long period of time, especially if you're planning to have kids. And yeah, once that gets into the mix, like financially, everything will be a bit more complicated. Overall, I do advocate for financial independence. I mean, not just for women, like for everyone. Um, and yeah, so that.
Yeah, I guess like going off of the topic of financial independence, specifically for women, there has been like a trend going on where I guess it's being promoted that women should be at stay-at-home wives. And obviously considering first, I want to make this really clear that I have no problems with stay-at-home wives, but I have a problem with the narrative that that women should depend on a man, especially financially, because I feel like that wouldn't be better for them in the long run. What do you have, I guess, to say about this?
Yeah, I would also echo your comment that I'm not against stay-at-home moms and whatnot. But I do feel like yeah, everyone should have a bit of financial independence. I mean, I don't see the disadvantage of that because who wants to live under someone else's thumb, really? Like if I want to make a purchase, yes, certainly if it's a large purchase, you should discuss with your partner to make sure everyone's on the same page, but not, but the idea of like asking someone for permission, why would you like subject yourself to that? Is my point of view. And also I don't my personal experience with this trend is from a friend who kind of like she's found that pursuing her own career is difficult. And like, yes, for sure it is. Um, but then I see it as her way of escaping or giving up on her career dreams and just said, just thinking that, oh yeah, I can just live off my husband. Like, who cares? So that to me is like just like I would want her to be more empowered to like just believe in yourself. You can do the things that you have your mind set to. So I don't recommend, the idea of finding a husband and depending on him as like this escape route. Um, but if your dreams are to, raise a family and have many children, then you have a partner that supports you, that's totally fine as well. But if you have ambitions to do your own thing, then like I would encourage you to keep pursuing that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I totally agree with that opinion, and my mom has always like drilled that kind of narrative into me. Well, anyways, to wrap it up, we really appreciated you for taking the time to join us on our podcast today. Tomby and I really appreciated your presence and your valuable insights you shared, and we are truly grateful for the opportunity to have you with us. Thank you.
And yeah, just a shout out to like thanks to you guys for doing this podcast and supporting the future women of the workplace.